By the end of this story, you will see your problems in a new light. You will discover how a simple change in your thinking can transform a dead end into a clear path. You'll witness a character navigate a seemingly impossible situation, not through force, but through wisdom and calm observation. The lesson learned here is a timeless tool for overcoming any obstacle, big or small, that life places in your way. In a small town lived a boy named Arav, who had one big weakness. Every challenge, from extra homework to a disagreement with a friend, felt like an insurmountable wall to him. While other children his age moved through their days with relative ease, taking small setbacks in stride, Arav would retreat. He became convinced the world was intentionally placing obstacles in his path, and this belief began to isolate him from his peers. His perspective took minor inconveniences and turned them into major crises that drained his energy and dominated his thoughts for hours. This pattern created a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because he saw every challenge as a major threat, he would avoid confronting problems directly. This avoidance only made the problems seem larger and more formidable in his mind. Each time he withdrew, his confidence shrank a little more. Arav's heart was like a small, still pond. In such a pond, even a single stone dropped into the water creates large, disrupting ripples that touch every shore. In the same way, a single piece of difficult homework or a hot afternoon would send waves of frustration through his entire being, affecting his mood and his interactions with everyone around him. Over time, he began to believe that a life without constant difficulty was simply impossible for him. He watched others and wondered why their lives seemed so much smoother, concluding that he was uniquely unlucky. This belief colored his entire experience of the world. An ordinary day, which should have been a mix of small tasks and simple pleasures, became for Arav a series of obstacles to be dreaded and endured. He approached each morning with a sense of impending struggle, already tired before the day had even begun. The real problem was not the challenges themselves. The amount of difficulty he faced was likely no greater than what his friends experienced. The true issue was the limited container he used to hold these challenges. His capacity to process and manage difficulty was small, like the pond, so everything that entered it became concentrated and overpowering. His father, a quiet and observant man, noticed this pattern. He saw how his son's own perspective was the source of his suffering. He watched Arav struggle with things that should not have caused such distress, and he knew that a simple, tangible lesson was needed. He understood that words alone would not be enough to break the cycle his son was trapped in. The lesson would have to be experienced, not just heard. It would require Arav to see and feel the difference for himself, to taste the consequences of a small heart, and then discover the possibility of a larger one. The father waited for the right moment to share this wisdom, knowing that the timing was as important as the lesson itself. One afternoon, instead of offering the usual advice, Arav's father approached him with a simple request. "Come with me," he said, leading the boy away from their home without any further explanation. Arav followed, expecting a long lecture about staying positive or thinking differently. His mind braced for the familiar words he had heard many times before. They walked in silence along a dirt path that led away from the town. The quiet of the evening walk created a stark contrast with the noise of worry that constantly filled Arav's mind. He kept waiting for his father to speak, to begin the lesson, but the man remained silent, his gaze fixed ahead. Arav grew confused as their destination became clear. His father was leading him toward a small, stagnant pond on the edge of the woods. It was a place Arav knew well, a spot he sometimes visited to be alone with his thoughts. He could not understand what possible lesson could be found here, at this ordinary pond. Arriving at the water's edge, his father finally stopped. The pond's surface was perfectly still, mirroring the fading evening sky. Without a word, the man took a small cloth pouch from his pocket. Arav watched, his confusion deepening. This was not the conversation he had prepared himself for. His father held up the pouch and looked at Arav. "I want you to observe what is about to happen," he said. "Pay complete attention." This instruction shifted the dynamic entirely. It was no longer about listening to advice, but about witnessing a demonstration. The father's calm tone carried a weight that commanded Arav's focus. This experiential approach was deliberate. It bypassed Arav's defensive reasoning, the part of him that would normally argue or dismiss spoken advice. By engaging him directly in an action, his father ensured the lesson would be felt, not just heard. Arav's mind, which was usually busy constructing arguments, now had a simple task: to watch. The stage was set not for a theoretical discussion about problems, but for a tangible demonstration using the elements before them. The pouch, the pond, and the instruction to observe created a sense of mystery. Arav's habitual anxiety about his own troubles began to recede, replaced by a growing curiosity about the purpose of this silent ritual. Arav's curiosity was genuinely piqued. His focus shifted entirely from the problems he had been ruminating on to the mystery unfolding before him. What was in the pouch? Why were they at the pond? What was his father about to do? The questions swirling in his head were now about the present moment, not his past difficulties. The first part of the lesson was about to begin, not with words, but with a simple, deliberate action. The father opened the pouch, and Arav leaned forward slightly, his attention fully captured. The quiet anticipation by the water's edge marked a turning point, a departure from their usual interactions. This was teaching through experience, a method that promised to convey meaning far beyond what words alone could achieve. His father poured a handful of salt into the still pond water. The white crystals made concentric circles where they hit the surface before slowly sinking to the bottom. He took a nearby stick and stirred it gently, creating small whirlpools that dispersed the salt throughout the pond. The water remained clear to the eye, giving no indication of the transformation that had occurred within it. He then asked Arav to cup his hands and taste the water. The boy knelt at the edge, his expression still showing mild curiosity about this strange demonstration. He scooped up some water in his palms and brought it to his lips. Arav expected little change, perhaps a slight mineral taste from the pond water, but the flavor that hit his tongue was intensely, unpleasantly salty. The bitterness was immediate and overwhelming, impossible to ignore. His face contorted involuntarily, and he spat the water back into the pond. The taste lingered on his tongue, sharp and distinct. This was no subtle change. The entire mouthful had become undrinkable because of that single handful of salt. The transformation from fresh water to brine was complete and shocking in its intensity. This simple act mirrored how Arav experienced life's difficulties, with acute intensity that made small problems feel overwhelming. A missed homework assignment felt like academic failure. A lost game felt like athletic incompetence. A single criticism could ruin his entire day. The salt represented those everyday challenges, and his reaction to the water showed how he typically responded to life's minor setbacks. In the confined space of the pond, the salt dominated the entire body of water.
The relatively small amount of salt had completely transformed the character of the water because the container was limited and stagnant. There was nowhere for the salt to go, no current to carry it away, so it concentrated and saturated every drop. The pond had no capacity to integrate the salt without being fundamentally changed by it. Arav's reaction showed on his face exactly what his father had expected to see. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in distaste. His mouth remained slightly puckered from the unpleasant flavor. This was a taste he recognized from his daily life, that sharp, overwhelming sensation when a small problem seemed to take over everything. The physical experience mirrored his emotional experiences so perfectly that he couldn't miss the connection. The lesson was visceral, connecting an abstract concept to a physical sensation that Arav could feel in his body. He wasn't just hearing about how he should handle problems differently, he was tasting the consequence of a limited capacity. The bitterness on his tongue made the metaphor immediate and unforgettable. His body understood the lesson before his mind could fully process it. He understood for the first time how a small container amplifies what is placed within it. The problem wasn't the salt itself. The same amount would have different effects in different contexts. The issue was the pond's inability to handle the addition without being completely transformed by it. Arav saw that his own heart had been like that pond, small, still, and easily dominated by whatever difficulty entered it. But the lesson was only half complete. The demonstration had shown the problem clearly, but not yet the solution. The father had made his point about the nature of constricted capacity, but the boy needed to see the alternative. They stood together by the bitter water, the taste still fresh in Arav's mouth, ready to continue to the second part of the demonstration.
His father poured a handful of salt from the pouch into the still pond water. The white crystals spread across the dark surface, swirling downward as they dissolved. He stirred the water gently with his hand, creating small circles that widened across the pond. Then he turned to Arav and asked him to cup his hands and taste the water from where he had stirred. Arav expected little change, perhaps a slight difference in taste. He knelt down, scooped some water into his palms, and brought it to his lips. The bitterness was immediate and overwhelming, impossible to ignore. His face tightened as the salty flavor filled his mouth. He had to spit it out, the taste lingering unpleasantly on his tongue. This simple act mirrored how Arav experienced life's difficulties, with acute and immediate intensity that colored everything. A small disappointment would spread through his entire day, just as the salt spread through the water. The pond, being confined and still, allowed the salt to concentrate and dominate its entire contents rather than being carried away. Arav's reaction showed clearly on his face. This was a taste he recognized from his daily life when problems arose, the way a single difficult assignment could make his whole school day feel miserable, or how one disagreement could ruin an entire weekend. The pond water had become a perfect representation of how he experienced his own struggles. The lesson was visceral, connecting an abstract concept about handling problems to a direct physical sensation. Words about resilience might have been forgotten, but the memory of that bitter taste would remain. He understood for the first time, in a way that went beyond intellectual comprehension, how a small container amplifies whatever is placed within it. But the lesson was only half complete. His father did not explain anything further about the meaning of what had just happened. He simply nodded, as if confirming that Arav had experienced exactly what he was meant to experience. Then he turned and began walking away from the pond, along a path that followed a small stream. They walked in silence again, but this time, Arav's mind was not racing with anxious thoughts.
Instead, he was contemplating the bitterness he had tasted and what it might mean. The path led them away from the still, contained space of the pond toward a different kind of body of water entirely. The sound of flowing water grew steadily louder as they walked until they reached the banks of a wide, moving river. The scale was completely different from the small pond. The river had a constant motion, a steady flow that carried leaves and small twigs downstream. The water moved with purpose, creating soft ripples and currents along its surface. Arav wondered what could possibly be different about repeating the same action here. His father took another, identical handful of salt from the same pouch. Without ceremony, he cast the salt into the center of the current, where the grains vanished instantly into the moving water. There was no concentration point, no swirling cloud of white, just the river continuing its flow unchanged. Arav watched as the river absorbed the salt without any visible alteration to its movement or appearance. The vast volume of water and its constant motion made the salt insignificant in comparison. His father again asked him to taste the water, gesturing toward the riverbank. Arav approached with skepticism, expecting at least some trace of the saltiness he had experienced at the pond. He knelt and cupped his hands, drawing water from the same area where the salt had entered. He brought it to his lips cautiously, prepared for the bitterness. This time, the water tasted fresh and clean, with only the faintest hint of what had been added. The difference was profound. The same ingredient had produced two radically different experiences depending on the container that received it. The river's capacity to integrate without being dominated was now a tangible reality, not just an abstract idea.
His father looked at him calmly and delivered the core insight. He placed a hand on Arav's shoulder and spoke in a measured tone. "Life's problems are like this salt," he said. "Their amount never really changes. The measure of difficulty that comes to each person is roughly the same." Arav had always believed that if only his problems would disappear, he would be happy. He thought peace was the absence of trouble. He had spent so much energy wishing for easier circumstances, for a life where nothing went wrong. The idea that the quantity of hardship might be constant was a completely new thought for him. The father explained that everyone faces a similar measure of difficulty in life. One person might struggle with schoolwork, another with friendships, another with family matters. The form of the salt changes, but the essential amount remains. Some difficulties come early, some come later. Some are visible to others, some are private. But no one is exempt from tasting the salt of life. "But how much they affect you," he continued, looking from the river back to his son, "depends entirely on the size of your heart." He gestured toward the pond they had left behind. The pond represents a constricted heart, where problems concentrate and dominate everything. When your heart is small, even a little salt makes the whole experience bitter. He then pointed to the flowing river before them. The river represents an expansive heart, where problems flow through with minimal disruption. When your heart is large, the same amount of salt is carried along, integrated, but not controlling the entire flow. The water remains fresh because there is so much more to it than just the salt. The goal was not to eliminate challenges, but to change one's internal capacity to hold them. This was the fundamental shift in understanding. Instead of fighting against the inevitable difficulties of life, the work becomes about building a container spacious enough to hold them without being overwhelmed. The focus moves from what happens to you to how you hold what happens.
This reflects the ancient wisdom that true happiness comes not from external circumstances, but from cultivating inner strength. By focusing on expanding his heart, Arav would be pursuing a kind of inner excellence. The ability to handle storms, exams, and chores with ease would follow naturally from this internal growth, not from manipulating external events. Arav stood in silence, the metaphor shifting his understanding of the source of his suffering. He had always looked outward, blaming the world for being too difficult. Now he saw that the bitterness he tasted came not from the salt itself, but from the smallness of the vessel receiving it. The problem was not out there in the world of events, it was in here, in the capacity of his own heart. He realized that his suffering was not proof that life was uniquely hard on him, but evidence that his heart had remained small and still like the pond. The solution was not to try to stop the salt from falling, which was impossible, but to become like the river, constantly moving, deep and capable of integrating what came its way without losing its essential nature. This insight felt both simple and profound. It meant that his peace was not dependent on life becoming perfect, but on his own growth. He had the power to change his experience, not by changing the world, but by changing the world within him. The salt would keep coming, as it does for everyone. The question was what kind of water he would choose to be.
The next day at school, the teacher assigned additional revision exercises for the upcoming examinations. She explained that the extra work would help solidify their understanding of the more challenging concepts they had covered that semester. This was exactly the kind of event that would normally trigger Arav's frustration and complaints. His shoulders tensed immediately, and he felt that familiar tightening in his chest that signaled another overwhelming burden was about to descend upon him. His old habit surfaced immediately, a familiar wave of resentment beginning to form in his mind. He thought about how unfair it was that they had to do more work, how the teacher was being unreasonable, how this would cut into his free time and add to his stress. The thoughts came automatically, like a well-worn path his mind knew how to follow without conscious direction. He could feel the words of complaint forming on his tongue, ready to be shared with his friends after class. But he paused, remembering the taste of the river water from the previous day. The memory came to him clearly, the freshness of the flowing water that had absorbed the salt so completely. He recalled standing there with his father, the realization dawning that the same salt could taste completely different depending on the container that held it. The physical memory of that moment stopped his automatic reaction in its tracks. He asked himself a new question, one that had never occurred to him before. Am I being the pond, or am I being the river? The question created a space between the event and his reaction, a moment of choice where before there had only been automatic response. He examined his thoughts and recognized the old pattern of making himself small in the face of difficulty. Instead of seeing the homework as an unfair burden placed upon him, he reframed it as salt for his river. He understood that this was not about the homework itself, but about his capacity to receive it. The additional work became not something to resist, but something to integrate, an opportunity to practice expanding his capacity for handling academic pressure. This shift in perspective changed everything about how he viewed the situation. It was an opportunity to practice, to grow his capacity for handling academic challenges rather than being overwhelmed by them. He realized that each time he faced a difficulty with openness rather than resistance, he was strengthening his ability to handle future challenges.
The homework became weight training for his mind, strengthening his resilience with each exercise completed without complaint or internal struggle. He took a deep breath and opened his notebook without a word of complaint. His fingers moved to write the assignment in his planner, and he noticed how different this action felt from previous times. There was no sigh of resignation, no muttered complaints under his breath. He simply accepted the task and began organizing how he would approach it during his study time that evening. The task felt different, not lighter in terms of the work required, but contained within a larger perspective that made it manageable. The homework remained the same number of problems, the same level of difficulty, but his relationship to it had transformed completely. He was no longer fighting against the reality of the assignment, but working with it, allowing it to become part of his flow rather than an obstacle blocking his path. This small victory marked the beginning of a conscious practice that would extend far beyond classroom assignments. It was the first time he had successfully interrupted his automatic response to difficulty and chosen a different way of being. The satisfaction he felt came not from avoiding the work, but from handling it differently, from proving to himself that change was possible through conscious choice and perspective.
Change did not come easily. The old voice of complaint was strong and familiar to Arav. Even after his success with the homework, he found himself slipping back into old patterns throughout the week. The new awareness was a fragile thing, easily overshadowed by years of habit. When his mother asked him to help with chores around the house, the immediate urge to whine was his first automatic reaction. He felt the protest forming on his tongue before he even considered the request itself. For a few days, he fluctuated between the new perspective and the old, comfortable misery. One moment he would handle a minor disappointment with surprising calm, and the next he would find himself stewing over a casual comment from a friend for hours. It was a strange inner conflict, a battle between the person he was learning to become and the person he had always been. The river-minded state required conscious effort, while the pond-minded state felt like falling back into a well-worn groove. Part of him wanted to revert completely, believing that expressing his frustration would provide a sense of relief. There was a twisted comfort in the familiar cycle of complaint and self-pity. It felt easier to blame external circumstances than to take responsibility for his internal state. He almost missed the certainty of his old misery, the predictable pattern of feeling wronged and then justifying those feelings to himself. But he began to notice the actual consequences of each choice. He saw that complaining, while offering a momentary release of tension, ultimately left him feeling smaller and more powerless. The brief satisfaction of voicing his irritation was always followed by a hollow feeling, as if he had given away a piece of his strength. The problem remained, but now he felt weaker for having complained about it. The momentary relief was an illusion that cost him his peace. Each time he consciously chose the river, however, he felt a subtle increase in his inner strength. It wasn't a dramatic feeling of victory, but a quiet sense of integrity. Choosing to wash the dishes without complaint or to accept a change of plans without resistance built a small deposit of confidence. He was proving to himself that he could handle discomfort without being controlled by it. These small acts of discipline were like deposits in a savings account of resilience. It was a discipline, like building a muscle, requiring consistent effort against the heavy inertia of his old self. The first few repetitions were the hardest, feeling unnatural and forced. But with each conscious choice to pause before reacting, to take a breath and ask the question, pond or river, the process became slightly less difficult. He was not waiting to feel like being the river. He was choosing to act like the river until the feeling followed the action.
He began to see his reactions not as inevitable reflexes forced upon him by the world, but as choices he made in response to events. This shift in perception was perhaps the most significant change of all. He was no longer a victim of his emotions, but an active participant in shaping them. A difficult situation presented a fork in the road, and he held the map. He could choose the narrow, bitter path of the pond or the wide, flowing path of the river. With each conscious choice, the river-minded response became slightly more automatic. The mental pathway for this new way of being was being carved a little deeper each day. What began as a strenuous act of will started to feel more like a natural inclination. The space between the trigger and his response widened, giving him more room to choose who he wanted to be in that moment. He was actively constructing a new default setting for his heart. He was not just managing individual incidents, but rewiring his fundamental approach to life. The goal was to make expansion his instinct, so that when salt fell into his day, his first unconscious tendency would be to flow with it rather than concentrate on it. This construction project was invisible to the outside world, but for Arav, it was the most important work he had ever undertaken.
A subtle change began to manifest in Arav's interactions with others. His classmates noticed he was calmer, less quick to react negatively to minor issues that arose during the school day. When a group project faced a setback, he no longer sighed dramatically or pointed fingers. When a game during recess didn't go his way, he simply shrugged and moved on. His facial expressions lost their familiar look of constant grievance, replaced by a quieter, more observant demeanor. This shift did not go unnoticed by those around him who were accustomed to his previous patterns. Initially suspicious, they wondered if he was just suppressing his feelings. Some classmates thought he might be holding in his frustration, that the calm exterior was a mask that would eventually crack under pressure. They watched him closely, waiting for the old Arab to reappear in a moment of stress. They had grown used to his emotional reactions and found his new steadiness unsettling at first, as if a familiar landmark had suddenly changed its shape. But they soon realized his calmness was genuine, born from a different way of processing events. They noticed that when something difficult happened, Arav would pause for a moment before responding, as if considering his options. His reactions were measured and thoughtful, rather than impulsive and emotional. There was no sense of bottled-up tension waiting to explode, only a quiet acceptance of circumstances as they were. His responses came from a place of choice rather than reflex, and this authenticity was unmistakable to those who interacted with him daily. People started to seek out his company, finding his presence steadying rather than draining. Where they once avoided him during stressful times because his anxiety was contagious, they now found that being near him had a calming effect. During exam periods, study groups invited him to join them. On the playground, other children included him in their games more readily. They sensed that he would not contribute to the drama of a situation, but would help navigate it with level-headedness. His social landscape began to transform as his internal world had. His teacher commented on his improved focus and the quality of his work. She noticed he completed assignments with greater care and participated in class discussions with more thoughtful contributions. Where he once struggled to concentrate when frustrated, he now maintained his attention through difficulties. His academic performance improved not because he became smarter overnight, but because he stopped getting in his own way. The energy he once spent on resisting challenges was now available for engaging with them productively. This external validation was not the goal, but it was a natural consequence of the internal shift. Arav had not set out to become more popular or to impress his teacher. His focus had been entirely on practicing the river mindset, on expanding his capacity to handle whatever came his way.
The social benefits emerged organically from this fundamental change in how he moved through the world. People respond to authenticity and emotional stability, and these were the qualities he was cultivating through his daily practice. Arav was learning that growing your heart doesn't just help you, it changes how you relate to the world. The expansion he was experiencing internally created more space for connection with others. He became a better listener because he wasn't constantly preparing his next complaint. He became more patient with his friends' shortcomings because he was learning to be patient with his own. His relationships deepened because he was bringing more of his true, unconstricted self to them. He experienced the social dividends of inner growth, feeling more connected and less isolated. The loneliness that had plagued him began to dissolve as he found himself included in conversations and activities from which he had previously felt excluded. This was not because others had changed their opinion of him, but because he had changed what he was projecting into his relationships. He was no longer putting up walls that kept people out, but creating bridges that allowed them to connect. His world was expanding, both inside and out. The internal work of becoming the river was reflected in his external circumstances. He had more friends, better academic results, and a greater sense of belonging. But most importantly, he had discovered that personal transformation is never a solitary affair. When you change how you relate to your own difficulties, you inevitably change how you relate to everyone around you. The ripples of inner growth extend far beyond the individual, touching every relationship and interaction in their path.
Weeks later, a genuine difficulty arose that tested Arav's new understanding. His father received news about potential changes at his workplace that could affect their family's stability. This was not a minor inconvenience, like homework or a spilled drink, but a situation with real emotional weight and consequences that extended beyond Arav's personal experience. The uncertainty touched everyone in the household, creating an atmosphere of quiet concern that hung in the air during meals and conversations. The old Arav would have been consumed by anxiety, seeing disaster at every turn. His mind would have constructed worst-case scenarios about moving away, losing friends, or financial struggles. He would have lain awake at night, imagining all the ways this could go wrong, his thoughts spinning in endless circles of worry. His reaction would have added to the family's stress rather than helping to manage it, creating another problem within the problem itself. The new Arav felt the worry, but it did not flood his entire being. He recognized the concern as natural and appropriate given the circumstances, but he did not allow it to dominate his every thought. When anxious thoughts arose, he acknowledged them without following them down their dark paths. He noticed the tension in his shoulders and the quickening of his pulse, but these physical reactions did not escalate into full-blown panic as they once would have. He acknowledged the problem without allowing it to define his every moment. He continued with his schoolwork, helped with household chores, and maintained his daily routines. The concern was present, like background music, but it did not stop him from living his life. He gave the situation the attention it deserved without making it the center of his existence. This balance allowed him to remain functional and present for his family when they needed him most. He asked himself the same question that had guided him through smaller challenges: pond or river? He consciously chose to widen his heart to hold this larger concern. He recognized that this situation called for even greater capacity, and he intentionally practiced expanding his perspective. He reminded himself that worry would not change the outcome, but clarity might help navigate whatever came their way. This did not make the problem disappear, but it allowed him to face it with clarity, not panic. He could listen to his parents' discussions without becoming overwhelmed by fear. He could ask thoughtful questions about the situation rather than making emotional demands.
His calm presence became a stabilizing force in the household, a quiet center that others could rely on when they felt uncertain or afraid. He could support his family instead of adding to the stress with his own overwhelm. When his mother seemed worried, he offered to help with extra chores. When his father looked tired, he made him tea without being asked. These small acts of support were possible because he wasn't consumed by his own anxiety. He had emotional space available to notice what others needed and respond with practical kindness. The practice with small salts had built the capacity to handle a larger one. The homework assignments, the minor disappointments, the daily irritations, all had been training for this moment. Each time he had chosen the river response to a small problem, he had been strengthening his ability to handle bigger challenges. The discipline of expansion had prepared him for something he couldn't have anticipated during those earlier practices. The metaphor was proving its scalability to real-life challenges. What worked for spilled milk also worked for family uncertainties. The principle remained the same regardless of the size of the difficulty. The salt was always salt, whether it was a teaspoon or a cupful. The difference lay in the container receiving it, and Arav had been diligently working to enlarge his container through consistent daily practice. This real-world test confirmed that the lesson wasn't just theoretical, but practical and powerful when applied to life's genuine difficulties.
Over the following months, a new steadiness became Arav's natural state. He no longer had to consciously battle every negative thought that arose. His baseline perception had shifted from one of constant threat to one of capable flow. The mental effort that was once required to choose the river response gradually diminished as that response became his instinct. He found that his mind now defaulted to a wider perspective without needing to be prompted, like a stream that has carved a deeper channel and now flows there naturally. Life continued to present its ordinary share of difficulties, challenging exams, disagreements with friends, small disappointments. A difficult math test still brought a flutter of nerves. A friend forgetting a promise still caused a pang of hurt. But these events now occurred within a context that could hold them without breaking. They were waves on the surface of his life, but they no longer threatened to capsize the entire vessel. He noticed that problems arrived, stayed for a time, and then passed, and his essential peace remained largely undisturbed throughout the process. He noticed his internal experience was lighter, freer, and more focused on solutions. Where his mind would once have become tangled in the emotions of a problem, it now moved more quickly to practical steps. When he received a lower grade than he hoped for, he felt the disappointment, but it was a clean feeling that didn't linger. He would then look at what he got wrong and make a plan to understand the material better. The emotional weight that had once clung to him for days now lifted quickly, leaving his energy clear for constructive action. The energy he once spent on complaining and worrying was now available for doing. He had more mental space for his studies, more patience for his friends, and more creativity in solving problems. This reclaimed energy was tangible. He felt less tired at the end of the day, even when he had accomplished more. He realized that resistance and complaint were incredibly draining activities, and by letting them go, he had freed up a significant reservoir of personal power. This was not about becoming emotionless or detached, but about relating to emotions from a place of strength. He still felt sadness, frustration, and anxiety, but he no longer felt controlled by them. He could observe an angry thought arise and choose not to feed it. He could feel nervous before a presentation without letting that nervousness dictate his performance. Emotions became weather passing through the sky of his awareness, rather than storms he was lost inside. This relationship with his inner world gave him a profound sense of autonomy. His heart had become like the river, deep and flowing, able to integrate experiences without being dominated by them.
The salt of life's difficulties still entered his days, but it was carried along in the current of his expanded awareness. It might change the taste momentarily, but it could never make the whole river bitter. This capacity to integrate without being overwhelmed was the true mark of his growth. It was a flexible strength, one that could adapt to whatever life brought without losing its essential nature. He had discovered that peace is not the absence of problems, but the presence of a large enough perspective. This was the fundamental insight that changed everything. For so long, he had sought peace by trying to eliminate anything that could disturb him, a futile effort that only created more tension. Now he understood that real peace came from within, from cultivating an inner space so vast that disturbances could move through it without causing a fundamental disruption. The goal was not a problem-free life, but a problem-proof heart. The transformation was complete, moving from theory to lived experience. What began as a lesson at the riverbank had become the very fabric of his daily life. He was no longer applying a technique, he was living from a new foundation. The wisdom was no longer something he had to remember, but something he had become. He understood that resilience is not a destination, but a continuous process of growth and adaptation, and he was now equipped to meet that process with confidence and grace for the rest of his life.
One evening, Arav found himself sitting by the same river where the lesson began. The setting sun painted the water in soft orange and purple hues, and the gentle sound of the current was the only noise breaking the evening quiet. He had come here not because he was upset, but simply to reflect, to sit with the wisdom that had slowly reshaped his life over the previous months. Watching the water flow past, he reflected on the journey from the boy he had been to the person he was becoming. He thought about the afternoons spent worrying over minor problems, the energy wasted on complaints that changed nothing. He remembered the heavy feeling in his chest that used to accompany even small disappointments, a weight that now felt foreign to him. The contrast between his past and present self was stark, and sitting in the place where the transformation started made the journey feel complete. He realized how close he had been to a life defined by perpetual struggle. A few months earlier, he had been firmly on a path where every difficulty would have been a crisis, where his happiness would have depended entirely on external circumstances aligning perfectly. He saw that his old way of thinking was a trap, a cycle that promised relief through complaint, but delivered only more suffering. The narrow path of the pond-hearted life stretched out behind him in his memory, a road he was grateful to have left. The simplicity of the solution struck him anew with quiet force. It required no external change, no special tools, and no specific conditions. The power to transform his experience had always been available, waiting only for him to recognize it. The shift was entirely internal, a matter of perspective and practice rather than circumstance. This realization carried a sense of profound relief, as he understood that his peace was not something he had to find in the world, but something he could cultivate within himself. He saw clearly now that he had been trying to remove the salt from his life, an impossible and exhausting task. He had believed that if he could just eliminate problems, avoid discomfort, and create perfect conditions, then he would be happy. This pursuit had drained his energy and focused his attention on things he could not control. It was a battle against the inevitable nature of life itself, a fight he was destined to lose. The real solution was to stop focusing on the salt and start focusing on becoming the river. This shift in attention changed everything. Instead of wasting energy trying to control what entered his life, he could devote that energy to expanding his capacity to receive it.
The problem remained the same, but his relationship to the problem transformed completely. He was no longer a victim of circumstance, but an active participant in shaping his experience. This shift in focus from external circumstances to internal capacity was the key that unlocked everything else. It turned him from passive to active, from reactive to responsive. He was no longer waiting for life to become easy, but was actively building the strength to handle whatever life brought. This approach put the power back in his hands, not to control events, but to determine their impact on him. It was a solution available to anyone, at any time, regardless of their situation. The river did not care what kind of salt entered it. The principle worked for small irritations and large crises alike. Age, background, or current difficulties did not matter. The only requirement was the willingness to practice, to consciously choose expansion over contraction each time a challenge arose. This universal accessibility made the wisdom feel even more valuable. He articulated the story's thesis clearly in his mind, a lesson now written on his heart through lived experience, rather than just understood as an idea. The words formed with the certainty that comes from having tested a principle and found it true. The theory had become reality. The metaphor had become a way of life. Every problem in life has a simple solution. It's not about removing the salt. It's about becoming the river. The water continued its steady flow beside him, carrying away the day, demonstrating the truth without needing any words at all. The lesson was complete, not as something to remember, but as something to live.
Arav's change did not go unnoticed by his parents. His father observed the transformation with quiet pride, seeing the lesson he had offered take root in his son's daily life. He watched as Arav handled minor setbacks without the dramatic reactions that had once been common. The father said nothing about these changes, allowing his son to discover the benefits of his new approach through lived experience rather than praise. His satisfaction came from witnessing the application of wisdom, not from taking credit for teaching it. His mother, who had worried about his tendency to despair, felt a wave of relief as weeks passed without major emotional crises. She noticed how he now came home from school with a lighter step, how he engaged with family meals without the cloud of frustration that used to follow him. The tension she had carried in her own shoulders began to ease as she saw her son developing the resilience she had prayed for. Her relief was quiet but profound, an unburdening of a mother's constant concern for her child's happiness. The household atmosphere became lighter as Arav's calmness influenced the family's emotional climate. Where there had been careful steps around his moods, now there was natural ease. Dinner conversations flowed more freely and laughter came more readily. The energy that had been spent managing Arav's reactions was now available for genuine connection. The home felt more spacious emotionally, as if the walls themselves had expanded to accommodate this new way of being together. He was now a source of stability rather than a point of concern. When smaller challenges arose in the family, Arav's steady presence provided a grounding influence. His younger sister began to seek him out when she had problems, sensing that he would listen without becoming upset himself. His parents found they could discuss family matters more openly, knowing that Arav would contribute thoughtful perspectives rather than emotional reactions. He had become a pillar rather than a vulnerability in the family structure. This demonstrated that personal growth is never a solitary affair. It benefits everyone in one's orbit. Arav's transformation rippled outward, touching each family member in different ways. His father found himself reflecting on his own responses to difficulty. His mother felt permission to worry less about things she couldn't control. The entire family system began to operate from a place of greater trust and resilience, each person influenced by the changes in one member. His parents saw that they had not just raised a child, but were helping to cultivate a resilient adult.
The lessons went beyond academic success or good behavior to something more fundamental, the development of character that could withstand life's inevitable challenges. They recognized that their most important work as parents was not to protect Arav from difficulty, but to equip him with the inner resources to meet it with strength. This understanding deepened their approach to parenting and their relationship with their son. The lesson had healed not only Arav's perspective, but also the relational dynamics at home. The patterns of walking on eggshells, of managing reactions, of worrying about emotional outbursts, these gradually faded away. In their place grew authentic interactions based on mutual respect and the capacity to handle normal family tensions without drama. The home became a place where people could be themselves without fear of triggering negative reactions. The family unit grew stronger, united by a shared understanding of how to face life's challenges. They developed a common language around the river metaphor, sometimes gently reminding each other to be the river when someone seemed overwhelmed. This shared framework created a sense of teamwork in navigating difficulties rather than leaving each person to struggle alone. They became allies in the project of building resilience rather than individuals coping in isolation. The wisdom had multiplied, creating a positive feedback loop. As Arav's stability influenced his parents, their increased calmness further supported his growth. Each person's practice of expansion made it easier for others to do the same. The lesson that began with one father and one son became a family inheritance, something they could all draw upon when facing their own challenges. What had been given to one had become available to all, demonstrating how personal transformation inevitably becomes collective benefit when we live in relationship with others.
To understand Arav's transformation, we must understand what complaining truly is. Complaining is the verbal expression of a constricted heart, the exact reaction of the pond when salt is poured into it. It is the sound of a capacity that is too small for what it contains. When we complain, we give voice to the feeling of being overwhelmed, of having no space to process what life has given us. We speak from a place of contraction, where the problem feels bigger than our ability to handle it. Complaining often feels productive, as if we are actively addressing the problem by voicing our displeasure. There is a momentary release of tension that can be mistaken for progress. We might feel that by complaining we are standing up for ourselves or shining a light on an injustice, but this feeling is deceptive. More often than not, complaining reinforces our sense of powerlessness. It focuses our attention on what we cannot control and amplifies our feeling of being a victim of circumstances. It is an expression of the problem, not a step toward a solution. Each complaint we utter narrows our focus onto the problem, making it appear larger and more solid in our minds. The more we talk about a difficulty, the more real and permanent it seems to become. Our words build a wall around the problem, trapping our attention inside with it. We stop seeing the wider context of our lives and see only the difficulty we are complaining about. This mental fixation makes it harder to find a way out because we are no longer looking at the whole picture. The act of complaining itself contracts the heart, reducing our capacity to find creative solutions. When we vocalize our frustration, we are essentially practicing being small. We are rehearsing the feeling of being overwhelmed. This mental rehearsal makes it more difficult to access the calm, expansive state of mind where creative solutions emerge. We become locked into a cycle where the complaint reinforces the feeling of smallness, which in turn makes the problem seem larger, which justifies more complaints. It is a downward spiral that weakens us. Complaining is fundamentally an attempt to expel the salt, to get rid of the problem by talking it away. We operate under the mistaken belief that if we express our displeasure loudly enough, the difficulty will somehow vanish. But this is like the pond trying to spit out the salt. It cannot be done. The salt is already integrated into the water. The real solution is not to try to remove the salt, but to enlarge the container. The shift is from trying to change what happens to us, to changing how we hold what happens to us.
Arav's transformation began the moment he replaced the habit of complaint with a simple internal question: pond or river? This question was not just a different thought, it was an act of expansion in itself. The very act of asking the question created a pause, a moment of space between the event and his reaction. In that space, he found the freedom to choose a different response. He shifted from being controlled by his automatic reactions to consciously shaping his experience. Recognizing complaining as a symptom of a constricted heart, rather than a solution to a problem, is the essential first step toward becoming the river. When you hear yourself complaining, you can recognize it as a signal that your perspective has narrowed. It is an indicator that you are focusing on the salt instead of on the size of your container. This awareness alone begins the process of expansion because you are no longer identified with the complaint, but are observing it. Choosing silence over complaint can often be a more powerful response. Silence creates space for the problem to be held without being amplified. It allows you to process the difficulty internally, to feel the emotion without giving it additional power through words. In the quiet, you can reconnect with your larger perspective, remembering that this problem is one event within the vast flow of your life. Silence is not passive. It is an active choice to stop feeding the problem with your attention and instead to cultivate the inner space needed to handle it with grace. This strategic use of quiet allows for clearer thinking and a more effective approach to any challenge you face.
To understand Arav's transformation, we must understand what complaining truly is. Complaining is the verbal expression of a constricted heart, the exact reaction of the pond when salt is poured into it. It is the sound of a capacity that is too small for what it contains. When we complain, we give voice to the feeling of being overwhelmed, of having no space to process what life has given us. We speak from a place of contraction, where the problem feels bigger than our ability to handle it. Complaining often feels productive, as if we are actively addressing the problem by voicing our displeasure. There's a momentary release of tension that can be mistaken for progress. We might feel that by complaining, we are standing up for ourselves or shining a light on an injustice. But this feeling is deceptive. More often than not, complaining reinforces our sense of powerlessness. It focuses our attention on what we cannot control and amplifies our feeling of being a victim of circumstances. It is an expression of the problem, not a step toward a solution. Each complaint we utter narrows our focus onto the problem, making it appear larger and more solid in our minds. The more we talk about a difficulty, the more real and permanent it seems to become. Our words build a wall around the problem, trapping our attention inside with it. We stop seeing the wider context of our lives and see only the difficulty we are complaining about. This mental fixation makes it harder to find a way out because we are no longer looking at the whole picture. The act of complaining itself contracts the heart, reducing our capacity to find creative solutions. When we vocalize our frustration, we are essentially practicing being small. We are rehearsing the feeling of being overwhelmed. This mental rehearsal makes it more difficult to access the calm, expansive state of mind where creative solutions emerge. We become locked into a cycle where the complaint reinforces the feeling of smallness, which in turn makes the problem seem larger, which justifies more complaints. It is a downward spiral that weakens us. Complaining is fundamentally an attempt to expel the salt, to get rid of the problem by talking it away. We operate under the mistaken belief that if we express our displeasure loudly enough, the difficulty will somehow vanish. But this is like the pond trying to spit out the salt. It cannot be done. The salt is already integrated into the water. The real solution is not to try to remove the salt, but to enlarge the container. The shift is from trying to change what happens to us to changing how we hold what happens to us. Arab's transformation began the moment he replaced the habit of complaint with a simple internal question: pond or river? This question was not just a different thought, it was an act of expansion in itself. The very act of asking the question created a pause, a moment of space between the event and his reaction. In that space, he found the freedom to choose a different response. He shifted from being controlled by his automatic reactions to consciously shaping his experience. Recognizing complaining as a symptom of a constricted heart rather than a solution to a problem is the essential first step toward becoming the river. When you hear yourself complaining, you can recognize it as a signal that your perspective has narrowed. It is an indicator that you are focusing on the salt instead of on the size of your container. This awareness alone begins the process of expansion, because you are no longer identified with the complaint, but are observing it. Choosing silence over complaint can often be a more powerful response. Silence creates space for the problem to be held without being amplified. It allows you to process the difficulty internally, to feel the emotion without giving it additional power through words. In the quiet, you can reconnect with your larger perspective, remembering that this problem is one event within the vast flow of your life. Silence is not passive. It is an active choice to stop feeding the problem with your attention and instead to cultivate the inner space needed to handle it with grace. This strategic use of quiet allows for clearer thinking and a more effective approach to any challenge you face.
Modern culture often promotes the idea that happiness comes from solving all our problems. We are conditioned to believe that if we can just fix what is wrong in our lives, we will finally achieve peace. This mindset creates a frantic, exhausting pursuit of a problem-free existence, which is ultimately an illusion. We rush from one solution to the next, always hoping the next fix will be the one that brings lasting contentment. For every problem solved, a new one inevitably arises. The salt is always there. Life is a continuous series of challenges, from minor inconveniences to major life changes. There is no finish line where difficulties cease to exist. Believing otherwise sets you up for disappointment, as each solved problem simply makes room for the next one to appear. The nature of existence is dynamic, not static, and challenges are part of that constant movement. Focusing exclusively on external solutions can lead to a life of perpetual dissatisfaction. When your sense of well-being depends entirely on circumstances being just right, you give your power away to forces beyond your control. You become a victim of whatever happens, riding a roller coaster of emotion based on daily events. This external focus creates a fragile happiness that shatters with every new difficulty, leaving you constantly trying to reassemble the pieces. Arav's journey shows that equanimity is found not by eliminating challenges, but by changing our relationship to them. His peace did not come when his homework became easier or his family's worries disappeared. It came when he learned to hold those difficulties differently. The problems remained, but his experience of them transformed completely. He discovered that the source of suffering is not the problem itself, but our resistance to it. This is not to say we should not solve problems when we can. Practical action is important and necessary. But our fundamental peace cannot depend on the total absence of challenges.
If your happiness requires that nothing ever goes wrong, you are setting an impossible condition for your own contentment. You are building your house on sand, vulnerable to the first storm that comes along. The river does not stop the salt from falling. It simply learns to flow with it integrated. The river understands that salt is part of the environment, something that will inevitably enter its waters. Instead of fighting this reality, the river accepts it and continues its journey. The salt becomes part of the flow without defining the river's essential nature. The water remains fresh and vital because it never stops moving forward. This insight liberates immense energy, previously wasted on fighting the unchangeable nature of life. Imagine all the mental and emotional effort you expend complaining about traffic, resenting difficult people, or worrying about things you cannot control. That energy could be redirected toward constructive action or simply enjoying the present moment. When you stop fighting reality, you free up resources that can be used for living more fully. Lasting peace comes from mastering the internal environment, not controlling the external one. The world outside will always contain uncertainty and difficulty. The only true domain of control you have is your own mind and heart. Your internal world is where you can cultivate stability, perspective, and resilience. This inner mastery makes you immune to the chaos of external events, not because you stop them, but because you change how you meet them. The most effective problem-solving tool is the expansion of your own capacity. When your heart is like a river, problems lose their power to devastate you. You can address them with clarity and effectiveness because you are not overwhelmed by them. You see solutions that were invisible when you were contracted in fear or frustration. Growing your capacity is the ultimate preparation for handling any challenge life presents, making you not just a problem solver, but a person who cannot be conquered by problems.
How does one practically apply this lesson between sunrise and sunset? It begins with a simple, moment-by-moment awareness of your internal state. You learn to notice the subtle shifts in your body and mind when something unpleasant happens. This awareness is the foundation upon which everything else is built. Without it, you remain on autopilot, reacting to life, rather than consciously shaping your responses to it. When faced with a frustration, a traffic jam, a critical comment, a missed deadline, notice the contraction. Feel the tightness in your chest, the quickening of your breath, the rush of negative thoughts. This is the familiar signal that your heart is becoming a pond. The key is to catch this reaction early, before it gains momentum and carries you away into full-blown complaint or despair. This moment of recognition is your point of power. In that moment, ask the pivotal question: am I making myself a pond right now? This simple inquiry creates a crucial pause in the automatic chain of events. It interrupts the habit of contraction and opens a space for choice. The question itself shifts your perspective from being the reaction to observing the reaction. You become the witness rather than the victim of your own patterns. Then consciously choose to expand. Take a deeper breath, filling your lungs completely and exhaling slowly. This physical act of expansion signals to your body that you are choosing a different response. Look at the bigger picture beyond the immediate frustration. Remind yourself that this is one moment in a long life, one event among many. This conscious choice is the active work of becoming the river. See the problem not as a catastrophe, but as a single event within the vast flow of your life. The traffic jam is not a personal attack on your schedule, but a temporary delay. The critical comment is not a final judgment on your worth, but one person's perspective. The missed deadline is not a career-ending failure, but a learning experience.
This reframing reduces the problem to its actual size rather than its emotional appearance. This does not deny the difficulty, but places it in a context where it loses its power to overwhelm. You acknowledge that the situation is challenging without allowing it to define your entire experience. The problem remains real, but it no longer seems all-consuming. You create mental space around it, which allows for clearer thinking and more effective response. The difficulty exists within you rather than you existing within the difficulty. With practice, this shift becomes quicker and more automatic, a new healthy habit. What begins as a conscious effort gradually becomes your natural way of being. The neural pathways that support the pond response weaken from lack of use, while those supporting the river response strengthen with repetition. You find yourself pausing and expanding without having to think about it, much like a musician who no longer needs to think about each note. Your daily life becomes the gym where you build the strength of your river heart. Every interaction, every minor irritation, every unexpected delay becomes an opportunity for practice. You stop waiting for perfect conditions to apply the lesson and start using your actual life as your training ground. The ordinary becomes extraordinary because it becomes the material for your transformation. Each small irritation is an opportunity to grow. The long line at the grocery store, the rainy day that cancels your plans, the burnt toast in the morning. These are not interruptions to your peace, but invitations to practice it. You come to appreciate these moments not despite their difficulty, but because of their usefulness in strengthening your capacity. You learn to welcome the salt because it gives your river something to flow through.
The benefits of this practice are cumulative and profound, building gradually through consistent application over time. Initially, the change is subtle, almost imperceptible. You notice a slightly calmer reaction to a minor frustration, a bit less internal drama when plans go awry. The shift feels small because it begins in quiet moments, a deep breath taken instead of a complaint voiced, a moment of pause before reacting. These small victories might seem insignificant individually, but together they form the foundation of real transformation. There will be days when the old pond mind feels stronger, when progress seems lost amid life's pressures. You might wake up feeling irritable for no clear reason, or a series of small frustrations might push you toward your old patterns. On these days, the river mindset might feel forced and unnatural, like wearing clothes that don't quite fit. This is not failure, but part of the process, a necessary testing of your developing resilience against the pull of familiar habits. Persistence pays dividends in increased emotional stamina that grows with each challenge you meet with grace. You develop clearer thinking because your mind is less cluttered with unnecessary drama and worry. Your relationships improve as you become more present and less reactive with the people around you. These benefits reinforce each other, creating a foundation of well-being that makes further growth easier and more natural. You will find that problems that once would have ruined your day now pass through with minimal disruption. A flat tire becomes an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe. A critical comment becomes feedback rather than a personal attack. A missed opportunity becomes a redirection rather than a failure. Your relationship to difficulty transforms so completely that the same events that once triggered intense reactions now barely ripple your calm. You conserve energy for meaningful action rather than wasting it on worry and complaint. The mental and emotional resources you once expended on resisting reality become available for creative pursuits, deeper connections, and productive work.
As this story concludes, it leaves you not with an ending, but with a beginning. The tale of Arav and his transformation is complete, but your own journey with this wisdom is just starting. What you do next with this understanding will determine whether it remains a pleasant story or becomes a life-changing practice. The real value lies not in hearing the lesson, but in applying it when life tests you. The lesson's power lies in its application to your own life, starting now. This is not theoretical knowledge to be stored away, but practical wisdom to be implemented immediately. The river metaphor only becomes real when you use it to navigate your actual difficulties. Your next moment of frustration is not an interruption, but an invitation to practice what you have learned here about handling life's inevitable challenges. It is easy to listen to a story and file it away as a nice idea, leaving habits unchanged. You might feel inspired for a moment, then return to your usual patterns when faced with real pressure. The story becomes another piece of entertainment rather than a tool for transformation. This is the natural resistance of the mind to change, the uncomfortable familiarity of old ways, even when they cause suffering. The real work begins when you close this video and face your next moment of difficulty. When someone speaks to you harshly, when a plan falls apart, when disappointment arrives at your door, these are the moments that matter. This is when you will discover whether the river is just a story or has become part of who you are. The transition from knowing to doing happens in these ordinary instants of choice. To make the transition from knowledge to wisdom, carry this single question with you. Let it be the lens through which you view your next challenge, big or small. The question is simple, but its implications are life-changing if applied consistently. It is the bridge between being the pond you might be today and the river you can become. The question is this: when salt falls into your life, what will you choose to be? This question creates a moment of pause between the event and your reaction. It interrupts the automatic response that usually controls your behavior. In that space, you find the freedom to choose your relationship to what is happening. You are no longer compelled to react in the same old ways. You can consciously decide whether to contract around the difficulty or expand to meet it with greater capacity. The power to answer lies entirely in your hands. No one can make this choice for you. Circumstances cannot force you to be the pond. Your past patterns do not determine your present response. You hold the ability to decide how you will meet whatever life brings your way. This is the ultimate freedom that Arav discovered, the freedom that comes from realizing that your peace does not depend on what happens, but on how you hold what happens. Begin with your next moment of irritation, however small it may seem. When you feel the urge to complain about something minor, pause and ask the question. When frustration arises at a delay or inconvenience, use it as practice. Each time you consciously choose the river, you strengthen that capacity within yourself. You build the mental and emotional muscles that allow you to handle larger difficulties when they come. The salt will keep falling into everyone's life, without exception. You cannot control that, but you can control what kind of container you will be when it arrives. This understanding turns you from a victim of circumstances into an active participant in shaping your experience. You stop trying to control what happens and start focusing on how you will meet what happens. This shift changes everything about how you move through your days and how you relate to the challenges that are part of every human life.
The greatest truth this story reveals is that the solution to suffering was never about changing the world, but about enlarging the self that experiences it. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, remember the taste of the river. Ask yourself the simple question: am I being the pond or am I being the river? Your answer will chart the course of your day, and ultimately, your life. Begin the practice today. Choose one small irritation and meet it as the river. That is how you start to flow.